Check, 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 check. Ja.
I think we are here together, a very special community, since we are obviously know it just at the start of blockchain, and I think it's interesting that we all gathered here together. Like there are people from Germany, there are people from London, from Netherlands, and everywhere. But we're all here united, and we want to bring the blockchain space further. That's why you came to hear about Archain. I think before I start, I would like to give a brief historical introduction how we came here, so that you can get it in a correct place. So blockchain all started in 2008 when Satoshi Nakamoto started his white paper in which he described a way to get consensus on certain states, certain values of balances of Bitcoin, but without having one central registry who is actually keeping track of these balances. Well, it was phenomenal. This was the very first time that such a problem was solved. But just keeping track of account balances is great, but it's not that great, not that flexible. And a couple of years later, Vitalik Buterin, he started with the idea of, hey, wait, if we can get consensus on states of balances of Bitcoin, why cannot we get consensus on something else? So he started Ethereum chain, and with Ethereum, the idea was to get consensus on the state of a virtual machine. And this virtual machine could handle arbitrary programs, which you call smart contracts, and you could program that, and people can interact with them, and you had great flexibility, because within these programs, you could also keep a ledger of balances, just as you're actually having in Bitcoin. So it was much more flexible. Here we come today. We are actually speaking about a technology which is just like Ethereum, having consensus on the state of a virtual machine. But with our chain, I think what's very special is that they thought about, okay, we can get consensus of a virtual machine, but what virtual machine do we choose? And it turns out that having a virtual machine like Ethereum has, the Ethereum virtual machine, is maybe not that of good of a choice for blockchain. I mean, it's working great, but Ethereum has some troubles with scaling, which they are trying to solve, and I'm actually confident they will be solved to a certain degree. But it's just not from the ground level up designed to be a virtual machine for the blockchain. So here comes our chain into the picture, because our chain is a concurrent virtual machine, which is a completely different way of computing, which has, in a mathematical way of describing things, has the notion of concurrency. And concurrency is having different processes, having different things, contracts you can call them, who are running at the same time, but which can influence each other on the fly. So you can think of processes as very abstract things, like a blockchain, like a shard of a blockchain, or like smart contracts, or private blockchains, public blockchains, who can live together, who can do their own stuff, but when needed, they can interact, and they can influence each other. So I'm not going to talk much more about this, because we'll have the whole evening, and I hope in the end you will be maybe as fascinated by it as I am, because I'm only involved with Archain for 4 weeks, but in these 4 weeks I've learned a lot, and my head is blowing. I think we all know the idea when we started to understand blockchain, and we were like having mindfuck. I think you will recognize that. And I think the same mindfuck happened to me for the second time when I started to understand Archain. So, I mean, I hope if maybe 5 people in this room or 10 people in this room who experience this mindfuck, that's great. Then send me an email if you have that. I would love to have that, and we can do an interview maybe. So Tim is our very first speaker, and enjoy the evening. Yeah, you still. Yeah.
Good. Hey, it's good to have you all here. For me also a very wonderful evening, seeing that happening here in Europe. I have seen many faces before, from the Ethereum community, from the Archain community, also people from the US coming all the way over the long way. And I met multiple people of you before, and I want to share some insights from that. Because most of those people which are in this room presenting this evening haven't heard about Archain 2 months ago. And I think this is the way how the blockchain space moves. It moves fast. I was invited after doing a Blockchain for Society meetup, which what the name says, is for thinking about how can we use blockchain for society, how can we use blockchain, this new technology, to solve problems which are related to all of us. It was in Hamburg when I met Philip, who was telling me about the governance conference of ARChain in the US, in Seattle, and asked me if I wanted to join. And I said, yes, great idea. Let's hop on the plane. It's just in 5 days. Yes, I can change my schedule for that. And we were speaking about governance there, about governance of a new platform which should serve humankind. And I think this is a central question. How do you govern decentralized systems? And at that conference, I recognized the potential of ARChain and why it's so important. And I will come back to that point, why it's so important and why we need something like this. Let's go one step back. You all have heard about smart contracts. Would you put your life on a smart contract? Would you make your life dependent on a smart contract today? If this is the case, please raise your hands.
Where does a smart contract live? On which blockchain?
Good question, and I like interaction. That's a good question. So this is a dependency, obviously. Would you trust a smart contract if it's mathematically proven correct? I would.
I mathematically prove, yeah.
And I can tell you why. Because we live in a world where new devices join this ecosystem every day. We all have a mobile phone, but we will have like many things there, like also like hard-written makers which are connected with the internet to receive updates or to send health signals. We're emerging into like a cyborg society. We will have like millions and millions and millions of devices which are connected to the internet, and exactly those devices are threatening the current infrastructure of the internet because it was built in the 70s and 80s. It was built originally to send a mail from A to B, to open a web browser. And today we have live streaming online to millions of people if potentially they are watching. Right? So what I'm saying here that things changed. And we are depending on those infrastructures today very, very heavily. If the internet is breaking down, we have a big trouble. Stock markets are going to crash. Actually, also a historical fact. The stock markets were the first thing which were internationally connected as a high priority thing to move globalization forward.
And we are here in the stock market.
Oh, this is a interesting fact as well. Yeah. So, coming back from that point, I think we need to think about that we need an infrastructure where we can depend with our lives on. Because self-driving cars, international banking industry, all this stuff is going to play a way more important role, especially connected to the blockchain space we see it today. All the systems are man-made. And when I started to understand the world, that it was a little bit more complex. When you go to school, you think that the complexity of the world fits in 12 books, right? And everything is black and white and easy to understand. And then it dawns after a while that the world is way more complex. And I asked myself the questions, how does those systems work? I was working as an IT security consultant for a while, had the ability to jump in a lot of companies and learn about how they functioned. The interesting thing with this is all those companies and all those people there are just people. They're cooking with water. When they stand up, they think about, okay, where's my coffee? And when they go to bed, they think, okay, the day is over. Everything else happened already. That was what was important for me, standing up, going to work, having my day, going to bed. But there are way bigger systems in this world. The global banking industry is surely one of the biggest engines we have for society. An engine which is run currently in a very high secured compute infrastructure. And until 2008, we don't even have a clue that there is an alternative to the system. In 2008, we got a leap to an alternative. There's a saying that you cannot fight the existing reality, that you can only create a better system to substitute one which you then make obsolete. And I think with Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin, we saw it in the first time in history that there might be a totally different approach to replace the global banking industry. And I think this is true also when we speak about social networks. But as Rico already introduced Bitcoin, and you know the story about Bitcoin, and already introduced Ethereum, and you know the story about Ethereum, I wanted to come back to the flaws we have in Ethereum, like with the DAO hack and the parity hack. And I know that there are like frameworks like Zeppelin. So I know that those problems are worked on. But the question we need to ask ourselves, if we really can solve them in a fundamental way so that we can rely on those systems in the future. I want to make an example with you. So I believe that we could do general elections with a blockchain. If we do some tweaking there, if we do use self-sovereign digital identities to ensure that we don't have like double voting from one person, and if we ensure that we have a voting protocol based on a blockchain which is secure, verifiable, anonym, we could probably all do a vote right now and could have the results in less than a minute. But if we want to have a general election in Germany or in the Netherlands, we have more in the Netherlands, we have more than 10.5 million people which wanted to vote. If we do that on Ethereum, how long does it take until the congestion is gone? So over 10 days, if we have 1 million transactions. I'm not sure if we are over that right now. But what I want to say here is we have a problem. And we have a problem if we take a Turing machine and we take it again on the second layer and put it in small boxes. Because the total transactions between the Turing machines, even if we do nesting, or in this case it's called sharding, we still have the problem that the total transactions on the main chain are not increasing like over a factor of 1,000 or something like that. So we will still have congestions there, even with plasma chains and even with sharding. And I know we are moving in the right direction, and this is awesome, and the Ethereum experiment is awesome. And I hope that it will continue very successfully. But to come back to the next point. If you restart a computer because it's broken, it's not a problem. If you restart a computer where a rocket is on it because it's a flight computer and the rocket is currently flying, the rocket will break. If you try to restart a computer where the whole human society is on, or such a system breaks down, like if you have a shutdown of the internet, this is a huge problem. And this problem is going only to increase. So what is the critical infrastructure we can build to ensure that we have a lasting, sustainable, secure, and scalable system we can rely on? The first thing what we think we need to build, and this is something Craig said as well, is social communication tools. Because we have like messengers today, but these messengers are controlled by monopolies pretty much. Most of you might use a Facebook Messenger. WhatsApp is belonging to Facebook as well. Instagram is belonging to Facebook as well. And we all trust on those information and communication channels. But this is something we don't need to have. We could have a messenger for everyone, which is free, which is respecting your privacy, and which gives us the opportunity to collaborate. And this is true for social networks as well. So when I said that all the people are standing up in the morning to get their coffee, and then they move through their day, and in the evening they go to bed, and they don't care about the rest of the world, this is not true for everybody. I believe that a lot of you are sitting here because you care about more than what is happening between your morning coffee and when you go to bed. That you happen to think about more than your own life. I believe that a lot of people think about how can we solve bigger problems. This was a driving question for me as well. How can we solve big problems originating, for example, in the banking industry? And Satoshi thought about that as well because he proposed a solution. And if we look at the global challenges we have today, and I mean global warming, for example, or international conflicts, we speak about massive displacement of people. And we had like 10 million people coming from Syria to Europe, and this was like, what will happen is 500 million people come from the Central East to Europe because they are attacked by the ISIS and they steal them the food and create an additional crisis to get them moving. Or if we have global warming, for example, in central Iran, this is that they don't have any water anymore. 1.5 degrees, the temperature goes up, and they don't have water anymore because it's not raining there. And if the coastlines are moving, most of the cities are there. And some people say we don't have the technology to coordinate us as humankind to get that done. Think about that. So what I'm saying is we are here, we are privileged. We can think about those problems. We are, to a specific degree here, very handy with technology. And I think with that comes a responsibility. A responsibility to think about how can we build coordination systems which enable us to solve those problems. Because we're the only ones, so to say, not the people in the war zone, which can think about that. Coming back to the social network, if we want to build something like a decentralized social network, which is free, where we can ensure that our privacy is protected, then it's the question, who is going to decide what content is allowed there? Or what policies we want to have there? Because we might not want to accept hate speech. We might not allow people to post their illegal content with abuse of children or something like that. But the question is, how can we solve that problem? Because then it's censorship, right? And who can censor that? So this is a difficult thing. It comes back to a problem I already speak about. This is decentralized governance. So if we want to solve decentralized governance, we need to understand what principles we want to apply to platforms and what principles we want to apply to decentralized applications. But how do we get to those principles? Because if I say I want to have it democratic, what is the symbol, the word, which is represented with a symbol for me? What does this symbol mean for me, and what does this symbol mean for all of you? Because it's probably something different. I might think about direct democracy, you might think about representative democracy. And the only way how we can figure out which principles we share for our platform is to develop governance tools which help us to crowdsource principles. And this means that we say a word, and then we start a synchronization process to understand the context. What do we mean with that? That we define that we have tools, for example, secure voting infrastructure, to vote things up and down, to have proposal and decision functions, and to have signaling functions. We need a new principle. So these questions are very, very pressing questions, because if we want to do decentralized governance in any way, if we want to have really decentralized systems, we need to tackle those. So I believe that we need first infrastructure which is secure, second a way that we can start decentralized governance in a way that we can distribute political power, so that we can crowdsource the principles we want to apply for platforms which are arising on those magnificent infrastructures. Let me check if I forgot something. Because I'm coming close to the end, and I'm happy to give the stage to all the other awesome speakers in this evening. Yeah, I think I sum it up. I believe, and this is the reason why I'm standing here, and this is the reason why I'm engaging with ArtChain, that this is the best shot we have right now on a scalable, secure blockchain. And you will learn this evening why. I believe that this is a requirement, not because it's nice and it's fancy and you can earn money with it and it's digital money, whatever, because it's a requirement to redefine collaboration, to redefine the way how we organize society to solve all these problems which approach right now, to get away from unpredictable, egocentric, corrupt leaders, and to enable us to find wise decisions in a time which is massively accelerating. I believe that we can build society operation systems, you can call it also a decentralized social network, which can be democratic, which can be better and be more fairer for all of us. I also believe that there are some attributes we need to take in mind. And those attributes for this blockchain, and I want to repeat them as the last statement before I leave here, are we need a secure, scalable, future-proven, politically decentralized platform. Thank you for having you all here.
If you give the microphone to
Yes.
Philip, I'll put the presentation up.
Can you help me? Just take it up. Okay. Let's switch. I help you with that one, and you get this.
There you go.
Shit. That wasn't good. Holy fuck. Oops.
Okay, we just broke the HDMI cable.
Oh, you broke it?
Yes, we broke it. Do we have a replacement for it? Use my laptop.
Good.
That was not your fault.
It was.
Do you want to join maybe the
Jeg tænker, hvis du kan. Der kunne give mig lidt.
Sorry?
The power. 22%. And then get a pause.
Do you need a charger? Should I get you a charger?
Yeah, it's
I get you a charger.
You cannot see it here. That's the only thing. Okay, I'm sorry.
it's a pity.
Yeah.
Right. It's my fault.
The laptop has almost run out of battery.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here tonight and tell you about RChain and how RChain might be the platform that could provide such an infrastructure that we need for such problems like global warming for global coordination. And I want to talk about how RChain can scale like nature. So, first point, all this information within this talk is not meant to be any trading or investment advice in any kind. Yeah. So, just a few words about me. I'm Philip. My background is in physics, so I studied physics, and then I stumbled upon Bitcoin in 2010. At that time, I really didn't get the concept behind, and I really thought this is just a short-term phenomena and will just disappear in near future. But yeah, I started mining and then forgot about that. And heard about Bitcoin again in the end of 2013 when the price skyrocketed about 1,000 US dollar, and tried to recover my private keys from the Bitcoins I've mined, but yeah, I'm one of those guys. But luckily, short after that, Ethereum came around, and I've read the very first blog post by Vitalik at that time, and it was one of those moments where you have just a mind explosion, just as Rinke said. So I was really blown away by this idea that one not only could have a decentralized currency and not only build for every decentralized application a new blockchain, but rather to have a blockchain where you can build your applications on top. And I contributed to the Ethereum project, especially during the stress test and testing phase. And yeah, since then I'm involved into the Ethereum ecosystem. Short after that, I started to focus more about, or shifted my focus more, also my academia focused more towards computer science and focused on game theory, so and mechanism design. And lately, I got involved into RChain because I think we've learned a lot through the last years, And there's some problems within the blockchain space, and some were mentioned here by Tim before, and Rinke. And I think that Archain could, by his approach, be that kind of platform that Tim was talking about. So, and I'm also involved into Blockio, which is kind of a gathering of blockchain enthusiasts, which provides some services around that. Yeah, and also an organizer of a meetup in Hamburg. So, just to point up again the lessons learned within the last 3 years. So, lesson 1 is proof of work as a consensus algorithm is rather simple, but is definitely not sustainable. So, you've definitely heard about that the energy consumption of Bitcoin is enormous, and yeah, so that's not sustainable, specifically if we're talking about global warming. That's not the way we should go, in my opinion. Then there is the second lesson, and maybe it was a hard lesson to be learned for many people in the crypto space, that writing smart contracts, buggy ones, is easy, write correct ones is pretty hard. And so, for example, there were within the Ethereum ecosystem, there were some bugs within the multisig wallet of Parity, or for example, the famous DAO hack. Yeah. So we need some kind of tools to build decentralized applications in a secure manner. And then there's also the lesson learned, which is no blockchain scales. And that's the truth. And if anyone currently says otherwise, well, I guess, in my opinion, he's lying. So no blockchain scales. And just as an example, there was this tradable card game, CryptoKitties, which clocked the whole Ethereum network. So yeah, that currently is no blockchain is scalable. So how can come Archain into this game? So Archain, as Ethereum, tries to build a general smart contract platform that provides the ability to build applications on top in a secure, sustainable, and scalable manner. And the approach is pretty scientific and mathematic. So topics in this, there are topics talked about category theory, computational calculi, or linear logic. And yeah, another methods used to build this platform is corrected by construction, so that you bring up axioms, and then you prove going on the very sound principle every step, and then you end up with a system which almost is self-evident to construct. So there is a way, more or less, that is, that is basically given out of this construction. So I want to talk about how Archain takes principles out of the nature, how nature scales into account. And if we really go and look how humans work, basically. So let's take a deep dive into our body, and we end up just zoom in, and we end up at a level where there are atoms. And those atoms could make a connection in a way, and by passing electrons, and then there's some bigger structure which is called molecules. And molecules themselves can arrange and organize into bigger stuff like cells. Cells themselves can specialize and then exchange, for example, chemicals and form some bigger structured tissues, and this goes on. So there are organs where hormones in the body regulate all these functions. So you see there is one principle, and this principle is that you build bigger and more complex structures out of smaller things. So this is called compositionality. And then there is a different, well, let's take another example first. So one other example in nature is, for example, ants. Ant colonies are amazing in multiple ways. I just want to point out one thing they can do. They organize more or less in a decentralized fashion. So each ant is in itself, of course, an organism, and the whole colony in itself, but is also kind of an organism. You can see it like this. And they're amazing, but they can build like bridges by just clocking them together, and then they can run over a gap. And they do it by exchanging messages or how's it called, pheromones, and so that they signal in a way what the other ants should do. And so there is a second principle we can derive, that coordination somehow also in our body is done by passing messages or signaling. And this is basically how, in a way, something is achieved in nature. And there's a third principle, which is, if we're going back to the body example, then your body, your cell in the brain, or the cell in your heart, doesn't need to know what a cell in your toe is doing or whatever. So there is this kind of principle that there are a lot of interactions going on the same time, but they're mostly not dependent on each other. So this is the principle of concurrency, so that you have processes going on at the same time without having the need necessarily to order them in a way, or to sequentialize them. So yeah, here are the three points we can take as the principles we can come up with if we take a close look at the nature. And it's like it's a little bit weird. Like it seems like that everyone has forgotten how things work in nature when we entered the blockchain space, because in a way blockchains are not fulfilling currently any of these needs. So, for example, take Ethereum as an example. They're running on one machine that's run the one world computer example, but all those kind of transactions are sequentialized. So there needs to be one kind of an order, because the underlying computation model is the Turing machine, or to be precise, the von Neumann machine. So it is essentially a sequentialized machine. And how does this ever gonna be scalable? It's incredible. Another point is that kind of compositionality within the computation model of a Turing machine is not given. Yeah. So just one example, sometimes there's a little bit confusion between concurrency and parallelism. So just as an example, take a highway with 4 lanes and and parallelism would be that you have 4 lanes, for example, and no lane crossing is allowed. And concurrency on there, so this would increase the overall performance in a way compared to a highway which has 2 lanes. But on the other hand, concurrency would mean in this context that lane crossing would be allowed, and in order to do so, you would need to signaling in a way, so you have some kind of blinkers, and then you're signaling the other car that you're trying to cross the lane, and so the car needs to make a little bit space that you can cross the lane and change the lane. And that's concurrency. So concurrency is about resource management in a way. So when we come back to a platform that needs to be scalable, one can ask the question, okay, how does a computation model for a scalable blockchain should look like in this domain? And we've come up with 2 properties already. So it should be concurrent, and it should be compositional. And there are 4 other properties, 2 other C's. Greg Meredith called them the 4 C's. There's the notion required to tell something about the complexity of a program. So how much resources are needed to run them, or how costly is it to run a program, especially we're given in the context of a blockchain, where in order to avoid denial of service attacks, you have to pay for the computation. Therefore, you need some model of measuring the execution, or the cost of an execution. And then there is completeness. You know completeness maybe from the Turing completeness in that way. So to be precise, one wouldn't really need completeness. Vitalik came up with the term rich statefulness, but for the simplicity, just called completeness. And so that this just says that you just need a way to build arbitrary programs, so that you can every program we can think of, you can build on this platform. And then there are 2 other properties. It's type theory, which is important in order to prove with formal methods that a program actually does what you think it does. And metaprogramming, which is that you want to have the ability to write a program which then writes programs. And most programs within the industry are written by programs nowadays. So these are the requirements, and now we can look. Okay, we have some computation models out there, and I mentioned one before. That's the Turing machine, and we can, for example, and Ethereum is based on a Turing machine, and most computers are Van Neumann machines which are based on Turing machines. So, completeness, yes, Turing complete. Compositionality, you can't whack 2 Turing machines together within the context of a Turing machine, get a third one. Concurrency, nah. And this is also nah. Yeah. And type theory and metaprogramming, not really. So what kind of other computational models are out there? There's the lambda calculus, and every functional programming language is based on the lambda calculus. And yes, it is great for compositionality. It's also great completeness, yeah. Complexity, not really. And concurrency, there's a theorem that every every functional programming language, or there's a theorem that's derived from the lambda calculus that basically every functional programming language is processing sequentially. So there we have it. Lambda calculus, not that good. Then there are some other Padrinets, CCS or whatever. Turns out that the only computation model that nearly fits all those criteria is the PyCalculus. But the PyCalculus does not have the metaprogramming requirement. And turns out that Greg Meredith, the thought leader behind this project RChain, came up with an idea to enhance the PyCalculus, the process calculus, and give the option to have metaprogramming as well. Yeah.
So how long ago were PyCalculus and row calculus invented?
Pardon?
How long ago were the PyCalculus and row calculus
Yeah,
invented?
that's my next page, basically. So, yes, there's another question?
You talked about one of the requirements were complexity.
Yeah.
Can you explain that again?
Complexity is you need a way to measure what kind and how many resources a program needs to be executed. So, for example, that you can say, okay, this program requires X amount of gas within the scope of Ethereum, for example. That would be the example. So, yeah, you need a way to measure how expensive it is to run it. That's meant to be, in this context, complexity. So, a little story about computational calculi. Robin Milner came up with the idea of a PyCalculus, process calculus, first in the beginning of the 90s. And his idea was, well, let's build a better computation model that describes the way actually our computers are processing better. So at that time, even there were some machines, and each machine was processing a piece of that information and pass a message with that processed information to another machine, and so on. So he thought about, okay, there's some messages to coordinate. Let's try to build a computation model that actually describes this overall process. That we have different kind of machines which talk to each other. And let's try to build a computation model that takes that in. And it turns out that it is possible, not only that the computation in itself is done by passing the messages. So you really can make a computation model where just the passing of the message is the actual processing. And as I talked before about, nature in a way takes a similar route. And it was then to Greg Meredith in the beginning of the 2000s that he invented the reflective higher order process calculus, so the row calculus, by adding reflection to this computation model, which gives the opportunity to do metaprogramming. So, in a really simple way, I just want to introduce you to the row calculus, and it's pretty. You can have a pretty good intuition about that. So there's a way to describe doing nothing. We all know doing nothing is great. So doing nothing is somewhere there. So then there's a way to listen for something on a certain name and then do something. There is a way to describe to call someone, for example, and send him something. And then there is the way to do two things in parallel, so multitasking. And at the bottom line, there is a way to get a certain information about something that's referenced. For example, look up, it's not the best example, but look up, for example, a phone or the person who owns a phone by the phone number. Or open a book at a specific page and look what's in there. So hopefully you have some feeling what it is about, because next is the formal way to say exactly the same. So P and Q are called processes, and there are multiple options. So that's a notion of describe multiple options. And P and Q, for example, could be the process to do nothing, to terminate. Or P and Q, the process, can be, for example, listen on a channel Y for a pattern X, and then do the process P, which in itself could be something of these four. And there's the notion to send something on channel X, and this send P, the process P, on channel X. There is the option to have two things done in parallel. So have P run in parallel with Q. So two processes run in parallel. And then there's the option to given a certain name, and if I call something name or channel, that's basically the same. So given a certain name, evaluate this name or this channel and get the process. And there's also the possibility to get a name from a certain process by quoting it. So that's basically the formal way to describe it, but hopefully you got something from the intuition example if this is too much math. So from this computation model, which is inherently concurrent, one can derive a programming language, and this was done, and this is called Erlang, and there will be talks about that later. And the syntax of this language is pretty similar to the formalism, so roughly the same syntax. In the beginning, so the RChain project is gonna launch at the end of this year, and there is the plan to have spatial types in there, so a way to reason about a structure, or something something similar like regular expressions, not really 100%, but goes in that direction. And there will be behavioral types later. And behavioral types are very interesting in a certain way, because it is a type that says you something like the program behaves. And this is really interesting, because if a software developer has an idea to program a smart contract or a program in general, he has an intention in mind. He then writes a specification for that, and then after, or maybe he skips that part, but just assume he writes a specification, and then he writes the implementation. And if you want to have a correct program in this whole reasoning, this line here, there can be done an error. So what behavioral types is interesting for is that you have another way to check whether what I've actually implemented fits to the thing that I specified or that I had in mind in the first place. So I really can see by looking at the program and at the type whether the program behaves in the way I intended to. it also gives a very expressive way to use formal methods to prove that the program actually does what it should do. Another one could come up with other interesting use cases for that behavioral types. Another would be, for example, that you could have such, if you want to, for example, if you have GitHub and you want to look for a project and want to use a library, well, it's kind of difficult to find one that fits your needs if you don't know what to look for, other than you were given a hint that you look for project X or Y. And so what you do on GitHub, for example, is search by text. And that's pretty terrible, because what should you look for? I mean, you can look up for certain code snippets or whatever, but what you really want to do is find a library that does something I want to use. And you could really use behavioral types for that, because then you can just use this kind of type system for look for programs you want to use, or you need a library for a certain behavior. And that's also a different kind of notion of scalability, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel again and again, so that you can use the programs that are already written there. So what about scaling, and how does this concurrency within the computation model comes into existence within the structure? So RChain is going to have a very expressive namespace system that I like to call sharding on steroids. So sharding is interesting because you go away from this notion of having one blockchain and every validator validates every transaction, but rather have a blockchain and some other blockchain nested into that. And namespaces, so what Ethereum does is it kind of artificially built this kind of sharding on top of this EVM, Ethereum Virtual Machine, which is, as I said, a sequential, is based on a sequential computation model. And RChain, on the other hand, is based on the row calculus, which is inherently concurrent. So this namespace system wasn't artificially invented on top. No, it's in there into the mathematic algebra formalism. It was there in the first place. And it turned out that the formalism in itself is pretty good in the domain of blockchain. So how you can think of these namespaces is like, it's kind of similar to URLs. So you have a way to find or to reach a certain resource at a given location, and these locations can be nested. At the launch of the project, there will be 30 regions, and think of regions as the place which is inhabited by the validators. And so if you want to become a validator within the RChain ecosystem, you register for one of, or maybe multiple regions, and then you're a validator in that region. And the namespaces, on the other hand, the set of namespaces is the power set of all the regions. So that means that the validators for a given namespace, for example, that is for a given namespace where X and where you want to have a resource out of X and Y, you have the combined. You have to use the validator sets of both both namespaces. So that means that if you want to have a transaction that is cross different namespaces, obviously it is more expensive because more validators need to coordinate. Yeah, and basically that's it from my side. I hope you learned something about how RChain actually tries to go a different route in the sense of scaling, and basically does its approach is quite similar what we can see within nature, for example.
We have 5 minutes for
Yeah.
questions. 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah, Pascal. Oh.
But we do the live stream, so we do the microphone display.
So you became famous by breaking Ethereum in its first versions. Have you tested your skills on RChain already?
I'm not currently involved into testing and that kind. I hope that when the testnet is released, that there will also be kind of a stress test, and then I will get my hands dirty again. Yeah.
So the testnet is an actual network, but the software, is it ready with it? I mean, can you set up private testnets?
Pardon?
Can you set up? Is the software ready? Is the client ready? Can you set up private testnets?
So the current project status is that there is not that kind of way to have a testnet running that far. So at the given point, no. But in the summer, late summer, this should be possible. Yes.
Okay.
So it looks like so, but it's actually on. So. Okay. So you mentioned like for verifying. So say you have a DApp that has applications today have like many dependencies, which in turn have many dependencies. So you could end up with a DApp that has like hundreds of dependencies.
Yeah.
How will that work if for verification? Will it still be in line with other blockchain solutions?
So if you want to bring, if I understand you correctly, it is the case that you want to have, or you give an example within the Ethereum context, and you want to bring that kind of program DApp over to RChain, and how this gonna look like within the RChain context, or
consider if you have a C application, maybe you have like a library like Boost, or if you have a JavaScript application, you maybe have a library like Connect or Express.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like.
All right. So as I said, this computation model is inherently concurrent, but sometimes you need to sequentialize, or you need an order of things. Then you can say explicitly for this case, okay, do that sequentially. Do this kind of processing sequentially. So that gives you the option to have such programs that there are certain dependencies also within the context of the row calculus. One important point is that with the concurrency, and for example, if you run two processes in parallel, you cannot come up with a situation where there's a congestion of resources. So you have this kind of notion of non-determinism. And this non-determinism is resolved within the layer of consensus. So within the consensus, it is defined what actually happened to resolve this possible non-determinism that exists within the scope of this computation model.
Maybe some direct updates, because to have that straight, the official information about test and release are indeed July this year. but I think this is very optimistic, so we will see if we can keep that timeline. And the other thing is the node communication for running a testnet, so that node-to-node communication is going to happen, is planned on the 0.4 release, which is currently at work. So it's currently being in the progress of being built, and the release date is at end of this month, beginning of next month. So we will see.
0.4.
0.4.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one more question. I think this is the last one, and there will be more presentations where hopefully some more things will be clarified. Yes.
Especially we'll have a talk about rolling, because I really didn't touch rolling in itself.
Yeah.
So it looks a lot like you took a Scala-like language model, in that it's sort of self-hosted, runs itself. It's like, rather than Faro, which runs straight on the machine, it runs straight as a blockchain. So it's very Scala-like. But then you decided to just throw a currency in there and say we'll use Casper to sync it all up. And it's basically pub, sub, and fork. That's it, guys.
Yeah. Almost, yeah.
Is there still a question? You want to
I'm sort of like, do you expect that, do you want this Scala-like model where you're just like really independent, doing your own little thing?
I mean,
Because
Scala in itself is a functional
because you
programming
haven't
language.
talked about language bindings either, which is like the first next thing if you have a very basic layout for like doing concurrency, is to bind like existing software into your model for concurrency. And I'm a little bit lost as to what the advantage is over doing Go fibers or Node.js events.
Yeah, I guess there will be a talk.
have the option to ask the right person for that.
Yeah, I guess there will be a talk about rolling in itself, and I guess just ask the question later. I guess that's more.
Well, it's much worse when you talk about the like cryptocurrency that goes with it, because it looks like you took a Scala model, an incomplete functional programming language, and you bolted a blockchain on top.
Well, that's not really the case.
It's
But
probably not, but you know, you only talked about the language.
yeah, I
so.
guess we can have a discussion about that later, or maybe it is answered within the other talks.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you. So we welcome discussion. I mean, that's important. This is very experimental. This is the very first time that we put a blockchain on top of such a language, even though actually this PyCalculus is existing already, also in production. Microsoft, Google, they already built system on top of a concurrent programming language. So it's not something new, but to put it on a blockchain is something completely new and maybe gets more attention now. So our next speaker is Udo. I don't know, I don't see him here. Does somebody know where he is?
There he is.
Yes, he's coming. Udo will talk about, yeah, please come. Yeah. He will talk about consensus within our chain. Maybe you can give the things to him. And consensus within our chain is determined, I hope I don't steal too much of your talk, but it is determined by proof of work. It's a special type of proof of work in the sense that they are implementing Casper, just as Ethereum does. But they do a little bit of a tweak. And within our chain, they're all mathematicians, so they want to prove that it's formally correct what they're actually doing. I also want to say, like, probably you're noting that we are actually referencing Ethereum all the time. And well, that's not a reason. It's the reason what I said in the beginning, where we're coming from. And our chain is basically the same as Ethereum, that we want to get consensus on the state of a virtual machine. Only we're changing the virtual machine. So that's just to get your mind straight. Did you have slides, or?
They are online.
Okay.
Yeah, you can open them.
Yeah, so on the drive.
Yeah.
This one? Implementation of CBC in Azure?
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wo ist der Laserpointer hier dran?
Sorry?
Der Laserpointer?
Yeah, it should work.
All right, just a short check. Hi. So I will talk about the correct by construction protocol Caspar, which was introduced by Vlad Zamfy. And especially I will look at the implementation in ArchChain. So speak up.
Speak loudly, please. This is not amplified, it's just for the recording.
Just for, okay,
yeah.
Nice. So my name is Patrick Udo Kunzin. I'm an engineer by education. I'm normally engineer more in the direction of mechanics, but 3 years ago I switched to numerics, and I'm, no.
Yeah, that's better.
Hi. Could you make it a little bit?
I think you need to stand back a bit.
Yeah. Okay, is this volume okay for you? Nice. So it's actually based in, I'm more based in the mechanics side, but then I switched 3 years ago to the computational side by doing fluid dynamics, where I focus on direct numerical simulation, which is some tough part within this field, and where research about turbulence and chaotic behavior. Then I got introduced to the blockchain technology 1 year ago at the beginning of last year, so it's 1.5 to be exactly, and it caught my interest. So now I'm here, and I want to say something about ArchChain. Why I find ArchChain interesting was this concurrently design and this scaling by nature. I mean, it's directly links to all what we know about chaotic design. Like, we will later see it behaves a little bit chaotic, by the way. It behaves not like sequential, like one thing happens when the next. No, everything is happening all the time, and the same is in my field, turbulence. So what I will do is, also disclaimer, I'm only a messenger, so I won't take any theaters of what you will see here. I visualize for you, I make schemes for you, so that you can understand something more easy than just reading and researching by your own, so I'm condensing, by the way. So, just a short introduction to correct by construction from the Caspar protocol. As I said, it was introduced by Vlad Zamfy. It belongs differently than introduced. I think it was a spelling error. It's a proof of stake protocol, by the way. So instead of solving a riddle, a very difficult riddle with a lot of computation power, I'm having a stake, which is a certain amount of tokens in my wallet, and with these tokens, I'm betting on certain blocks, for example. So, and if other people, that's just short. If other people join the bet and validate it, this block is forged. Yeah, it's added to the blockchain. So what Vlad made very differently is he solved this nothing at stake problem. Because in many of the proof of stake protocols, you had the thing you could bet on an invalid block and you didn't get punished for it. That means you can do it several times, you can repeat your process, and you don't need to worry about your stake actually. Other in proof of work, there you need to invest your computational power, which is resource, which is energy, which is your hardware, the processing time you need for it. So there you invest your resources. Now he introduced the process which he simply called slashing. That means if people behave malicious, they get punished. Their stake gets slashed away. He said in the beginning, he said totally slashed away. So that means if you have your 10,000, your 50,000 worth of US dollar worth inside in your stake, and you bet on a wrong block, and somebody finds it out that your justification you sent was wrong, your stake is away. So this solves the problem. You cannot repeatedly torture the blockchain, and you won't have such a strong incentive to try it, because at the first try, your stake is lost. In proof of work, you just shortly switch your resources and then you only pay for your resources, you still have your hardware at home. It doesn't get burned. In this protocol now, it gets burned. It's like I'm destroying your Antminer. If I find out you tried even something which is not valid, the Antminers are gone. So one thing was punishing the validators for malicious behavior, like putting wrong blocks on the, or suggesting betting on wrong blocks. Or, for example, they could also be punished for non-performing, meaning it gets important when I'm offline. So then I'm, and not reliable on the network. And and he also introduced, which is not here, equivalence, it's called. When I start to justify one block, and I bet on one block, I could also start to bet on another block in most systems. And the thing is now, if someone finds out, I always need to give a justification why I did bet on this block and why I did bet on the other block. And if I find out that they are mathematically contradicting, this is equivalence, and at this point, your stake got slashed away too. So that's the main part which is important, which you need to keep in head. I will later go more in detail when we talk about the implementation in RChain, which I actually start just right now. So in RChain, we have a concurrent system. And concurrent system means that not every validator is starting at one block and then take the next one and the next one. No, everyone finds blocks. So this is a higher rate, actually, at which we build our blockchain, and a higher transaction rate. So we need to think now how we can bring this how this consensus is now in this namespace property and this concurrently property built in. So the first thing is necessary for our proof of stake system to work is that every validator knows every validator. I cannot slash you if I don't know where you are and who you are. So everyone needs to know everyone. That means we need a main proof of stake contract within our smart contract system where every validator is bonded. So at this top level, we have bonding. That means validators can assign as a validator, or a future validator can assign for a validator. We have unbonding. That means I can say I unsign myself from my validation. And further, the slashing protocol works over this top level. As I said, I need to reach you, so I need to know you, so it needs to be at the top level. So from this top level on, we have many regions or namespaces where RChain works. And every region has a specific local proof of stake contract. And within this local proof of stake contracts, there actually is the rewarding regulated. So that means we do not have rewards and stake at one place. We have the bonding of the stake in the top level, and we have the regulation of the rewards in the local level. That also means if I want to get my stake back, I need to invoke the smart contract at the top. If I need to get my rewards, or if I want them to be calculated, updated, I need to go to the regional level, to the local level, where I'm actually assigned for validating. So in this region, we have, if we have validators in these regions, there might be active validators, which are actually set. Each local contract has a number of active validators. And if this maximum number is reached, then we have also validators in the queue. That means if I want to join and it's already full, I get to the queue. If the queue is full, I get rejected. So in the region, in the local contract, we define, as I said, the maximum number of active validators, the maximum number of queued validators. Why it is so, I already told you. The maximum unbonding rate. So that means if I want to unbond from my smart contract and many others want this too at the same time, then nobody's there. So who's calculating? Who's validating? Nobody. So that means I need a rate to say, okay, you can leave, but please not too fast. On the other hand, we have a post-unbonding stakeholding time, which actually serves at one specific problem, because if we have an asynchronous system like we have an R chain, there's a probability actually that someone has suggested building a block which is not right, then unsigns from the smart contracts, and then later on jumps again inside after, let's say, like 50 blocks and rebuild on this block. And this is a long-range attack, and this can damage the blockchain. And also we have a minimum bond amount, which is like the minimum stake you have inside, and you have a maximum stake, so that you do not get too powerful, because your vote is evaluated by your bond, actually by your stake. So, and also we have a cryptographic evidence for the performance, which says that you can perform on this protocol actually. Yeah, this information is also known at the top level post contract, because if I apply for a region, the top level contract needs to know, okay, what are the requirements? And how this is solved, I will explain on the next slide. So for example, if I want to bond, yeah, I sent a message to a top level contract, which I shortly just call post contract. And this one checks the message actually. Within this message, I give the information, okay, the region I want to join, so where I join, the form of my ID, which could be my public key. So if I want to get later on my rewards and my bond back, they need to know it's me when I ask for them. A purse, so where my tokens are stored. And I also need a cryptographic evidence, which is defined by the local contract. So this will happen sequentially, actually. So after our proof of stake contract gets this message, he first validates, okay, is the purse empty or is there something in the purse? For example, somebody could open just a lot of requests, this is demand of service attack, but with no value within the purses. So I got a lot of requests within our blockchain for validating this this question of our future validator, or wrong future validators. So if his purse is empty, he gets a rejection. If it's valid and I have something in my purse, then I check, okay, good, how many people are already in this region you want to work? So at this moment, the top level contract requests information of our local contract. And if, for example, the maximum number of active validators is reached, nothing more is evaluated, and the future validator is directly put into the queue and later re-evaluated again to save computational power. So if there is enough space, we go right away. Maybe I should use the pointer. So here we were going down, queuing of the applicant. And now we have 3 places as active validators. And at that point, we check, okay, are you able to join? Do you have a proof for this local contract? And if this proof is invalid, it's actually taken as an attack. At that point, the tokens are deduced if there are any tokens on the wallet, which should be at this point. So the top level contract deduces the tokens from the wallet and of course rejects. He won't allow it at this stage. But if this check of the cryptical proof is valid, now the staking amount or the bond is checked. So if it is in the right range, it's valid. If it's not in the right range, it gets rejected. And if it's valid, we are finished nearly. So the tokens are finally bonded. The validator and bytes are cryptographically documented in the parent block. And the validator is added to the region or to the local contract. Yeah, so this DOS attack we had. So what is the second one? If I want to bond somewhere, I want to start as a validator and I want to quit at some point as a validator. So This works differently. I'm now already a validator. I now invoke an unbond with a message where I put some certain arguments inside. These arguments are the signature of a block after which I want to unbond, and also the channel where I want to receive my stake, my bond back. And yeah, this is sent to the top-level contract again. This top-level contract then checks the unbonding rate of a region. Yeah? If too many left, he rejects and say, no, no way, we need you to validate there to keep the blockchain part alive, the part alive of the blockchain. If it's valid, the validator is unsigned, and now the place is free. So if the active number, if the maximum active number, active validator number is reached, and there's now a place free, that also means that we possibly have somebody in the queue. Now, randomly, someone of the queue is chosen to take his place. This is the action between. And then begins the post-staking time. What's the post-staking time? It's what I mentioned. We want to avoid long-range attack. So, but if you unbond and I give you back your money, what do you risk? Nothing. Your reward maybe, but it's less than your bond, possibly. So, in order not to give an incentive or to give you an incentive to do a long-range attack without being punished, which is some of the main aspects of this protocol, you have a post-staking time like, okay, your stake is here until, let's say, for 100 blocks. So after 100 blocks, we say, you get your stake back. No, because at this point, it's highly uncertain that something went wrong. At this point, when we reach our limit, a purse is sent to the X-validator, so he gets his bond back. But from this bond is deducted some amount of slashing. Differently than prior suggested, the idea now is not at, depending on the fault you cause, and not to slash all your amount of a bond. So some faults might be minor, and there you can say, okay, only 5%, only 10% of your bond is slashed. The rest you can still use. The next one is, I want to slash somebody. Now, I know how I bond, I know how I unbond, but in order to keep the system safe, to punish somebody, there needs to be a punisher. So every validator who is in the system is able to slash another validator. And this we do by finding errors in the justification. So this process works like we have a validator A and B. Validator A invokes a slash with a message. In the slash, he says, okay, the ID of the offender, validator B, the malicious one, I have here. And then the signature of the accuser, that's me. And then the offense description, like roughly speaking, okay, you said at this point, and there follows this block after this block, but that's not true. Actually, it was this block. But you stated your opinion, you didn't change it. So this was your fault. Cryptographic evidence of the offense, so documentation could it be, and a purse return channel. So now it gets interesting. After invoking this slash, the post contract checks the evidence. If it's invalid, validator R gets slashed, and his coins get deduced away. So this should build a barrier to people who wants to earn money by slashing and not by staking or minting or And if it's valid, the accused validator B is slashed. Validator A gets a purse with a slash amount. So I can earn money if I find something who behaves not nice. That's a secondary channel of income, actually, which where we hope, okay, there's an economic interest in people finding other people who is malicious. The contra is here at this point. Well, I said we have a post-staking time. That means we have a time where you cannot unbond. Now, if I slash you and I get the amount of your bond, the total amount. I can, off-chain, I can say, hey, I slashed you, I get your amount, and I give it back to you. So this is a way to circumvent this post-staking time. This still is a contra, and they are working on it, how to solve it. Nothing is fixed at this moment. There are first versions online, but they still get improved. So, what are slash-able events? Slash-able events are a breach of service level agreement. That means if I do not perform right or perform well, if I have too many offline time, I get slashed. Maybe not the whole amount, but some amount. Then the production of an invalid block, which will be highly sanctioned, and equivocation, which also will be highly sanctioned. So equivocation, as I said, is like I'm putting two arguments. Now, this whole system works with arguments, with justifications. And then on the blockchain, there are certain messages. One time I said this one thing, the other time the other thing. And like I said before, this is contradiction. This can be mathematically proven. And then at that moment, I did an error, and this error is actually high. So it's a high problem for the blockchain, because at this point, you can change the blockchain to an invalid point. So this is slash-able events. And now it's interesting, if I stake something, I want to get a return, which is my reward. This is on the local level. Everything I told you before was on the top level. Now we switch to the local level. And at this point, again, the validator invokes an for example, if I want to update my reward. Now, the local contract I need to know what's the level of my actual reward right now. So I need to update it somewhere to write it in a blog. And for this, I invoke an update with a message to my local POS contract of the region where I'm working. This checks, okay, good, are you really from this region? Is it justified? At this moment, and if it's valid, it updates the validator's balance. It also updates the balances of other validators. No? If I'm starting to calculate for some blocks the fees, the returning fees or the minting amount, I can also start to calculate it for the other ones. So, and this balance, this update of the balance or the reward is now calculated by a discount times the transaction fees of the certain blocks. And what's the discount? What's the sense behind the discount? Now, for example, I can start my own region, and I can start to, stake there. We call it staking at this time. And then I can build many blocks or suggest many blocks behind each other consecutive. The problem is when I do it consecutive, I have no cooperation with the other nodes, with the other validators. And the discount now, it's actually a factor which decreases with increasing consecutive blocks. That means it gives me an incentive. Left. I'm nearly finished. Yeah, okay. This gives me an incentive to cooperate with other validators. So, yeah. Yeah, and of course I provide a signature where I can identify it. Otherwise, everybody could write this message. So now the only thing left is our payout. If I want to be payout, I again send a message to the local POS contract. The local POS contract again checks the content of it. If it's valid, okay, you get your payout sent to your purse. Hey. Well, it's the last slide actually. You get a payout sent to you, a purse sent to your channel you provide, and this. Okay, nice. That's better actually. Okay, I sent my ID and I sent my purse return channel, and if it's valid, I get a purse with a reward amount of rewards I built up or I staked in the system. That was it. No, sorry. Okay, that's an idea we need to talk about actually. It's propositions. So the original idea of the CSP Casper protocol was that I set my bet on a single block. But now we want to build a scalable solution, a solution which can process a higher amount of transactions. And by this, I need a different solution than only picking one block, another one, another one. And additionally, we have concurrency. That means not every node knows when a block comes, actually. And they would need a long time to communicate which was the first one. And this would lower our rate. Now, in order to higher the transaction rate, I can give propositions. For example, like, I saw this block, and I know the other one block, it came afterwards. And then I can put a bet on it. And I can make this n times with length of n. Based on the weight of people who bet on the same line of blocks, like 20 blocks in a row, which came after which one, this gets confirmed by the system. No? And by this I can, by not focusing on the single blocks, I can indeed higher my transaction rate. So this is an example. The thing is, in our concurrent system, we also have a possibility that blocks merge. And we do not only have one chain, one side chain, or one fork, and that was it. We have also the possibility they come back. No, they split again, they come back. We have 3 side chains. They merge together again. And this is a simulation visually. Hmm? We have to finish? Yeah. Yeah, I cannot, but where I can.
Yeah, here.
Oh, okay.
It's like a different
okay.
screen.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's taken from an article from Michael Birch. Yeah, wait. I can also. Yeah. Okay, we have a circle here, otherwise it would run out of a picture. Yeah, that's how it works. Or how it looks like, visualized. Do you have any questions so far?
There's no time.
Okay.
Yeah, so, wait, let's just put this off quickly. Sorry, we're really tight on schedule. So right now there will be no time for questions. After the break we have 2 more talks, and we also have another live interview with the founder of ArtChain, so we'll be able to ask all your questions. I just want to drop, before I announce the next speaker, who is only here for 5 minutes, but she's actually very important, I want to drop one kind of mindfuck which I have myself. So let's say you have this different validators, right, and different namespaces on which they can validate. But you can have, on the top-level contract, you can have certain requirements. You say, this region has 30 validators are allowed there. But you could also say, this region, only addresses x1, x2, to x10 are able to interact with each other. And what do you have then? What kind of blockchain if you say only these type of addresses are able to interact with each other? A consortium. Okay, so it turns out that because this concurrency, actually ArtChain can be regarded as consortium and private and public at the same time. So that's just a drop. The next speaker is Claire Tolan. She's here from Berlin. She came here this morning. Actually, she's very special because Resonate, which is the company which she's representing, is one of the very first companies who actually got funding from the ArtChain fund. They have a lot of money, which is good. So she'll be telling how it is to be one of the first companies developing on ArtChain. Should I just give you
of course, I'm happy to.
You want to be amplified?
Yeah, maybe actually, yeah. Testing, yeah. So hi everyone, like Rinke said, thank you. I'm Claire, I'm an artist and a programmer from Berlin, and I'm working for the Resonate Cooperative. We've been funded by Reflective, which is one of ArtChain's investment arms. So I say Resonate cooperative, and I think the cooperative part is quite important. One thing that hasn't been touched on here tonight so much is that our chain is also run as a cooperative, so you pay a flat fee and then you're a voting member of the organization, and Resonate is very similar. Oh, we were going to, can I put on the, can you do it? Resonate.is, yeah. I'll just show you our website. So now you're all welcome to join, and you pay a flat fee, and then you get to be part of our decision-making process. And what Resonate is, importantly, is a music streaming and music social network that will be built on our chain. It's not currently decentralized, but we're prototyping a bunch of projects on Ethereum this summer, and then it kind of in the beginning of the fall we'll start the transition onto our chain. And the way that the streaming process currently works, so we have a beta streaming app. You're welcome to make an account, log in. You pay to add credits with fiat or credit cards right now, and then you can stream any song on the platform for a very small amount. Your next stream of that song will cost slightly more, and then 16 streams later you'll own the song. So our model is somewhere between Apple Music and Spotify. We're already giving artists a larger cut of the proceeds than Spotify does, and we hope to increase that amount even more. One of the things that we're prototyping right now is a token that will be launched on Ethereum in the fall. It will be exchangeable on our platform for streaming credits, and then whenever we transition onto our chain and can take advantage of its scaling, the token will become much more complex. Listeners will be able to earn the token by performing different functions on the platform, and artists, in addition to earning the token for streams, will be able to spend it to promote their music. So this is really cool. And we're also working, I think, quite importantly, with Mycelia for Music, which is Imogen Heap's blockchain initiative to develop a musician-focused digital identifier, a DID. We're working with LifeID, another our-chain-funded platform, to develop this as well, and it will basically serve as like a passport for musicians to access different services and have a self-sovereign identity and control of their data while doing so. So these are our main projects. During the break, I'll be downstairs by the Resonate banner, and if you're interested, please come talk to me. Yeah, I think that's everything I have to say for now. Yes, I won't take any more of your time, but thanks, Rinke, for letting me talk for a bit, and yeah, please come say hi during the break. Thanks.
Okay, so it's half an hour sharp, and we start on time. So if you come later, fine, but we start 21:30 sharp. Philip introduce something of RChain, of the. Yes, can we start again? Gentleman in the back, please. No? Okay, then we just start. Please go.
I need a thing, Rink.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the talks previous to ours outlined what like row calculus was and what RChain is aiming to do. And what we're going to do is give you an introduction to Rolang, the actual programming language in which RChain is written. First, a little bit about us. Who are we? My name is Hassan, and
I'm Thomas.
Yes. And we're both full-stack developers, and yeah, there's not much information else of us out there. So we're basically the same person, only I spent a little bit more time in the sun than him. I'm going to talk about the basics of the Rolang syntax. Before we can actually start coding and give you code examples, we need to first know what the syntax is, what all the symbols mean. And yeah, before I'm going to do that, I'm going to give you, so that everybody is on the same page, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction or like a recap of how normal programming languages work. Normally you define a function, call that function, and the function gets executed sequentially. So here's a piece of JavaScript code. You define a function with an input. The input gets incorporated in the output, and the output gets returned. So this gives hello RChain. That's really not the case with Rolang. As we saw previously, everything is executed sequentially. In Rolang, everything is executed concurrently. Everything is essentially happening at the same time. Like if you're watching TV and eating a sandwich. And the symbol that indicates that is the pipe symbol, like the symbol in between those two things. So it's a really important symbol in Rolang, and almost every line ends with it. It's like a semicolon in other languages, only this is required. Yeah, next I'm going to talk about channels. Channels can send and receive. A sending channel has an exclamation mark behind it and gets executed, and then it's a channel that's actually sending something. A receiving channel is essentially a for loop, like the programmers under us know what a for loop is, and it receives from a channel. There's a distinction being made between one line and two lines. That's basically just if a receiving channel receives it once or all the time, like while the process is running. So putting those two things together that we just learned, everything is executed concurrently, and channels can send and receive. We can create something like this, where the first line is sending something, second line is receiving, and both are executed at the same time. And because both are executed at the same time, we can change the order of this. And it doesn't matter, because everything is executed at the same time. I'm saying executed at the same time really a lot. Okay. So another principle in Rolang is matching. So if you have a piece of code and you have a receiving channel that accepts two arguments, x and y, and you have a sending channel that sends two parameters, hello and world, it gets executed normally. It's matched, as we call it. But if you just give one parameter to the sending channel, it won't execute because it's not matched. And you can even define in your receiving channels what kind of parameter you would like to receive. For example, here the first parameter needs to be hello. It's not. This doesn't get executed. But here it is, and it gets executed. Then we have named processes. This is a little bit vague to explain right now, but Thomas will like take it over and in the later phase to put this into code examples. So I hope it will be clear by then, but right now, just hold on. So the first line is a named process. A process, for example, in JavaScript, you define a variable with var x is 2, for example. The 2 is the process in this case, and x is the name of this process. In Rolang, the name is the process. So how do you pass a process, or how do you receive something on a channel without passing the whole process to it, but just a pointer to it? We can do that with an asterisk put in front of the named process. And then you can pass it into a channel. You must be wondering, how do we call that process and execute it? That's with an @ symbol before the name of the process. And the exclamation point or the bang says that it's a sending channel. Just to recap, Rolang is asynchronous and concurrent, and that's defined by the pipe symbol. You can send and receive on channels. Sending is defined by the exclamation point, and receiving is done with a for loop. You can convert between names and processes to use them as pointers or execute the process, and that's done with the @ symbol and the asterisk. So this is all you need to know for now. Am I missing something?
That's it. That's basically it.
So this is all you need to know right now, and right now it's super vague. If you come from like a normal programming background with non-concurrent languages, it's a little bit vague, but with code examples from Thomas, I hope it will be clear, and else you can ask us questions downstairs.
Just a side note.
Yeah.
It's the other way around. So star is.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
We typo. Okay, so I'll blame it on a typo. I don't know. No. So yeah, it's the other way around. An asterisk is a process from name. @ symbol is name from process. All right, take it over.
Cool. So I'll actually show you some actual examples of using Rolang. So as you've heard by now, RChain itself isn't yet ready. There will be a testnet released this summer, and then the mainnet will be released at the end of this year. The release of the testnet, by the way, will probably coincide roughly with the developer conference in Berlin. So if you want to stay up to date on that, please follow RChain_co-op on Twitter. They'll tweet out all the details. So on the RChain developer website, you can find a great tutorial with a lot of code examples. And one of the first things this tutorial will tell you is that there are basically two ways to run Rolang code. One is installing your own RChain node. The other is using a tool Aslan and I built called RChain.cloud, which is basically like JS Fiddle or JS Bin. Yeah. Which allows you to just enter some Rolang code, run it, and see what happens on the node. Really quick way to try and grasp the language without having to do any installing of packages or Docker or anything. Sure. So let's go into the default code example you'll see whenever you actually start up RChain.cloud. It's of course a hello world example, like everything. What it does is it defines a new channel called hello world in line 1. And then in line 2, it defines that hello world should be a process that accepts one parameter, namely name. What it then does is, the only thing this example does is output hello Joe. But you can't actually say first output hello and then output Joe, because everything in this language is concurrent. So the way this is done is you create a new channel called ACK, which is short for acknowledgement. And you call this special system channel called stdout ACK, which stands for stdout with acknowledgement. stdout is printing to the terminal. And it's passed two parameters, namely the string hello and then a reference to the channel ACK. At the same time, it also receives something on the ACK channel. And when it does, we know that the hello has been printed, so then it can print the second part, namely the name parameter we got before. While that contract is being put in place, we also actually execute it with the value Joe. So what this example does is it outputs hello Joe. Super helpful. Let's actually, to further understand this, because this is super simple, it basically only has one process that gets executed. See how we would implement stdout egg if we would have to do it ourselves. You can't really, but just as an example. It would look something like this. We named it stdout egg 2 because you can't actually redefine a system channel. And it has two parameters, the message and the channel that it should call back on. And the way we implemented it is we send the message to stdout and at the same time call back to the channel. We send that channel, that callback channel, just the value 0, which is equivalent to null in PHP or JavaScript. Unfortunately, of course, stdout and the callback will be executed at the same time. And then later on in this example, as soon as we get that callback, we'll execute another stdout. So what this actually does is it outputs Joe hello. Or it could basically output any of them in any random order. It just happens that calling back to a channel or sending a message to a channel is apparently faster in this implementation than printing the stdout, which causes the second stdout to be executed before the first one. Let's go into some details that have been discussed before, but actually show them in code. One of the fun things you can do with Rolang is that even though it looks nothing like any object-oriented programming language you've ever used, you can actually do something that's quite similar. For this, I borrowed some code from Rinke and then mutilated it because it was too long for a single slide. So what this does is it defines a process called calculator, and that contract takes one parameter, namely red, which is a channel on which basically you can see calculator as an object here, if you were to use object-oriented terms. And what the first line of the contract does, so line 5, is call back with an instance of this object. It's only terminology I'm using to explain it because that's not actually what's happening, but it might help to show the similarities. What it then does is it listens on the channel that we send back in the callback for a specific type of argument, namely 4 different arguments, where the first one is equal to the string sum, and the second 2 can be whatever you want, but for this to work, they have to be integers. So when we actually then call this contract and get back an instance of the object, we can call it object with the string sum, 2 integers and a callback, and the sum method will be executed. So that's quite neat for people that come from object-oriented programming to kind of try to understand this language. Something else that's pretty fun is that it's based on a lot of built-in security principles, and it makes it really easy to implement the principle of least authority, which basically means don't give anyone more access to data than they need. And there's a few different standard utilities you use basically to implement that. One of them is called revocable forwarder. It's one of the simplest ones. You could compare this to trying to sign in to Spotify with your Facebook account. Once you do that, Spotify gets access to your Facebook account, but only until you click the revoke button in your Facebook settings. And it's actually pretty easy to implement something like that in Rolang. It's only 17 lines. And this example is on the Rolang tutorial as well, so feel free to check it out there. And then you can implement it by calling that contract that we created in the previous slide, make revocable forwarder, and basically get a tool that allows you to control access to a certain object without giving like free range, unlimited access. There's way more examples on the developer website. Most of them have a button to immediately run it on archchain.cloud so that you can actually see what happens. So yeah, I urge you to check it out, give it a try, and if you have any feedback for archchain.cloud, please let Hassan and me know.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions?
No questions? All right. Oh, there's a question.
There you go.
A burning question, actually. Sorry, I have no developer background. I'm more of the business and the functional side. I just would like to know, in your development environment, what kind of use cases you cover. Maybe I missed a part in the start. Sorry, I wasn't here.
Well, you can basically build any type of blockchain application with this. These are just really simple examples because it's hard to actually build something super useful since we don't have a testnet yet. So we can build a smart contract and run it locally. That wouldn't really bring us much. So until that actually gets released, we won't get much more complex things than this. But you can basically build any type of blockchain application that you can imagine using this syntax. I hope that answers your question.
Partially, yeah. Thanks.
Sorry. And not only blockchain applications, but Rolang in itself is just a normal programming language. So you can build everything basically.
Oh.
I have a question as well. Can you tell us how you came up with archchain.cloud?
Yeah, dude. Okay, so yeah, we were at the Archchain Developers Conference in Boulder, Colorado, a few weeks ago, and we hadn't heard from Archchain ever before that, and within one day we wanted to get started, get the environment up and running, but there were some limitations. For example, if you run Windows, that's not Windows 10 Pro, you can't really get playing with it without a lot of setting up. So what we thought is, why not run it in the cloud, and have a public URL that anyone can visit, and just create an instance of a node to execute your code on. And that's what we built in the hotel room while we were at the conference, and just to help people get started with Archchain.cloud.
Yeah, only negative effect of that was that we missed some talks on consensus and still don't understand it at all.
Yeah,
but at least we are able to run Rolang now.
Yeah, exactly. And as a last note, if there are no more questions. Okay, there's a question.
This is maybe an out of scope question, and also Philip maybe can answer that. But it's a thing that is nagging me a little bit the whole time. The standard out channel. Yeah. There's a reason why Ethereum does not do standard out, and this is why, because then the locks are not part of the consensus, and you can forge them. So will this be part of the Rolang thing or not?
It will definitely not have any influence, I think, on consensus. It's more just a development tool right now, because otherwise you wouldn't see anything happen at all when you run a Rolang smart contract. So I don't know how it is being handled in consensus, but maybe it's probably even removed when the mainnet is launched, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because yeah, it's not the standard part of the Rolang language.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions? Okay, question there.
So like So when you learn about a new language, one of the first things you want to know is like about the types. Didn't see anything about the types in this thing. Like in Solidity, you have crazy types, like you specify bit sizes and things like that. Here's nothing like that. Is there?
I think it's quite limited right now. I actually didn't realize that it already supported strings until I started playing with some of those examples. I think it's still being expanded, but it will stay pretty standard within the normal Java and Scala type system, I think. I'm guessing. Probably, Philip, you can give a better answer.
I hope it's not going to... Yeah.
I think the language is in very rapid development, so it's changing probably even faster than Solidity is changing. So yeah.
So we'll know when the mainnet launches and a more stable version of the R node is released. Yeah.
And at the beginning, it seems quite intimidating, but I would just recommend to go to this URL and do the tutorial. It has a weird, it doesn't have a steep learning curve, it has a weird learning curve. That's like a roller coaster, so you're frustrated and like feeling like the king of the world 2 seconds apart. So yeah, I would just recommend start playing with it. That's the only way to learn, and you will be ahead of everybody else if the mainnet launches and the first stable version is live. Thank you.
So our next speaker is David, which is coming at the moment. So they used to say, we had one talk at a developers conference, and they said that RChain is, or Rolang is simple but not easy, which means that if you're coming from a developer's background, it might be very difficult, but it is rather simple. Like you have these primitives of sending and receiving and quoting and unquoting, which is completely different than having functions and calling these functions. Yes, it's simple but not easy. I can kind of testify that it is not that difficult once you get the concept, but to get the concept is not that simple. So, David, yeah, it is another. David is going to tell another example about Rolang, because we realized that most likely you will not get it in one talk. What's the mission of, what's the idea of Rolang? So he's going to explain it in a different way, and maybe there's some people who are capable to understand this. And yeah, so enjoy.
Let me do that. I'm comfortable touching myself. So. Okay. So this is only for the recording, right?
Do you want to be amplified or not?
I can hear myself. I can hear myself. I don't have issues with that. This is your computer, I guess. I would like to find my presentation. It should be in the folder.
All right. In the West folder.
I think. Escape. Okay. Will it show the speaker notes?
No, if it comes, no.
If we do it right, it will.
They're still sorting that out, short announcement. Are there any people from Berlin here? From the Berlin area? Yes.
Maybe we use the keys for that. I think this would work.
As this is the first big meetup in Europe, we are planning other meetups as well in Berlin and London. And I just speak loud enough that this is hearable here for the live stream as well. Or
yeah, please do that.
We don't have exact dates, but we expect that we have in the next 4 to 6 weeks a meetup in Berlin with the help of Resonate, and we are going to move forward with a meetup in London in the next, say, 8 to 10 weeks. So just to let you know, if you have any ideas where a good meetup would be, would be a good place to have a meetup, just let us know. And we might find a way to organize it with you. All right. Thank you. How many people you asked there? We will plan for 50 to 100. Yeah.
But maybe also tell something about the developers conference. Pardon? About the next developer conference. Go ahead. Yeah, so these meetups are kind of organized by us. We don't have a lot of tight connections with Archain in the sense that we are actually employed there. But there will be an officially organized, I wouldn't call it a meetup, it will be a conference of a couple of days, just as the ones where we were in Boulder a couple of weeks ago. This one will be in Berlin, 3 till 6 December, if I'm correct. So if we triggered something and you like it and you want to know more, you want to meet the founders and you want actually to start developing, 3 to 6 September of this year is your go. And yeah. And there will be an Ethereum conference in Berlin immediately afterwards that, so that's probably very smart of them to choose this date. So all the Ethereum devs, they can combine.
And before that, there's Burning Man.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we have everything set that wasn't really set before. So I have my speaker notes. I have my beautiful background, which is very reddish pinkish, which is actually the official color of the Archain logo, which is why I picked it, to make it very in your face. No, I'm tired. I don't even want to tell you about it. I guess you are tired too. So I chose this to communicate that I'm trying to do something very visual here. I'm not going to bore you with, well, there will be code, but it will be colored, so it will be kind of enjoyable. That's the idea of this talk. So I'd say we just jump right in. So you already know that Rolang is pretty awesome, right? It's inherently concurrent, it's asynchronous, it works with processes, which means that all computation actually happens through message passing, which is bloody awesome, right? But I think in the talk right before this one, you have seen a few smart contracts, and maybe you felt like this. Maybe you had a brain knot, maybe you had a brain hemorrhage, maybe you need to see a professional, medical professional. I definitely felt that way. I mean, like Rinke, I got in 6 weeks ago, but Rinke has a lot more time on his hands than I do. So what I was looking for really was a way to absorb a smart contract in a much better way than just staring at it, which is actually currently the state of the art when it comes to Archain smart contracts. Stop laughing, I'm trying to be serious here. And I did some digging, and last year at the Ethereum DevCon in Mexico, Greg Meredith, I think you know that he's the inventor of Rolang, he came up with a way to visualize smart contracts, and I actually drew upon that and started going through the tutorial smart contracts and visualizing them in the same way. And that's what I will show you today. So, short revision. We have channels, we have processes, and we have private channels. Those are kind of the most important things you should kind of keep in mind for the rest of the evening. We know that we can get a channel from a process by quoting it, easy enough, and that channels serve the purpose of passing messages. Of course, also they serve the purpose of having messages read from them, but this is another thing. Processes are what we send over channels in Rolang. And also what we can get a process from a channel by dereferencing it using the asterisk operator. Private channels are a very, very interesting thing. I'm not sure if you heard about it because I wasn't present during the previous talk. They're private, so access to anything contained, sorry, my mistake. They're private unless you send them to another process, so the process can access them. Otherwise, only stuff in the lexical scope of the private channel actually can access stuff on the private channel. The building blocks are pretty simple. So this is a channel, and it will be visualized by two, well, I don't want to call them nodes, but let's call them nodes that contain the name of the channel and for ease of making it visible, a vertical or slanted pipe. Outside of that, we have processes which will be made visible by a rectangle with a gray border and the process description with the parameters. Oops, that should have been removed. Ignore. And well, I already told you about coding and uncoding of processes and names. last but not least, the two most important activities: sending a process over a channel and listening for a message on a certain channel. Those are the things that I have visualized in this way. Essentially, this is sending V over the channel Z, and if we visualize the channel in this way, this is the visualization of essentially just sending V over the channel. This is pretty simple. For listening for a specific pattern, W, on a channel Y, we have the for construction, and this is essentially also. This is not a process. Don't make the mistake I made. This gray border here does not symbolize a process. It's just a symbol that is easily understood within the context of a smart contract. When you have several of these large boxes next to one another, it's a replacement for the pipe expression, which just says that two things are happening in parallel. On the next slide, when we have several of these, you will kind of see what I mean with that. Another thing that no, that's actually it. All right, simple examples. Hello world and receiving names. If you've actually studied the developer tutorial before, you will know what these are. I wanted to actually make it the second half of the talk, a complex smart contract, but I realized that a smart contract that essentially showcases all the capabilities of Rolang right now I either have the smart contract on the slides or I have the visualization on the slides. I cannot have both unless I have two projectors, so I kind of cut that out. Let's jump into the Hello World contract. What we have at the beginning, the outermost box, is the creation of the Hello World channel. We use the new in keywords to make this a private channel, so any other process that would like to access this can only access this if it is within the lexical scope of the Hello World channel. And if you follow the lines from the Hello World, you see that essentially here is the channel goes into this contract, the channel is also accessed here, and we have two input events. We have Hello World and the sending of the processified my channel. And like I said before, we have one gray box here for this contract and one gray box here for the construction of the new channel. So these two happen in parallel. And I think this is actually a very simple case because you have only nesting of one level. But at least for me, when I look at this, I immediately see, okay, I have this happening in parallel. This is in the lexical scope of the outermost box. And if I didn't even see the code, I could potentially write this down by hand on paper. So I'm not sure what's faster for you to process. For me, at least, it would be an image like this. When we make it a little bit more complicated, sorry, this is another, yeah, actually I will explain the functionality of this contract unless this happened in the talk before. Can you tell me if you went into the Hello World contract before?
It's like different one, so might be worth reading.
Okay. Well, where do I start? Because I'm already one slide advanced. Should I go back? No, okay, let's be quite literal here. So within the code, you see that we define this channel here. We define it as a private channel, and then we have two things happening in parallel. We create a contract, Hello World, with the return channel, and we create a new private channel that sends onto the Hello World channel the message my channel, but the message is essentially just a channel that is turned into a process. What purpose does this actually serve? Because, you know, in a typical Hello World example, you kind of output Hello World. What we achieve here is essentially that we have a way to trigger the Hello World contract, which is contained here, and we do this by sending the my channel to the Hello World to the Hello World channel, which then invokes the contract. And this is kind of this is it essentially. Let's go to the more complex sample. It's a little bit more complex than that. Let's start with the outside again. We have another private channel which we call hello again at this time. Within that, we have a contract hello again, which also, a contract always takes a parameter, but in this case, instead of actually acting upon the parameter, we throw it away using the underscore wildcard, which means that whatever input you have, you give to the contract, when you invoke it, it's just nulled. And within that contract, we have two more things. We create another private channel, which is called the chan, for visibility. And we also have another for statement, which reads a specific pattern from the channel. And once this pattern is read from the channel, it would normally it would normally turn into execute what's in the body of the for expression. Right now, we have a nil, a stop process within the body of the for expression, but normally when we receive something on the channel, we would act upon it. I wanted to go a little bit more into this expression here with the name pattern. So add text is essentially a pattern which means that it's looking for a specific for a process on the channel chan, and when it detects this, it essentially receives this as a name, because you can only receive names on a channel, quotes this, so interprets this as a process, and binds this to the free variable text. So now we can use this process under the moniker text. Pretty easy. You can already imagine if we had actually something more complex in terms of processing, we would already run out of space here. So this is kind of the problem we run into when using this type of visualization. What I'm really looking for at some point in the future is a way to generate these visualizations from these contracts themselves, because what we're doing here, it's not really complicated. And it would be great to actually automate this, but that's a lot of work, especially when you kind of think how you want to put this on one single page. And this is something that I haven't really solved yet. I don't know how to go about that, but I think that is something that would be quite valuable. Even finding a little bit cleaner, how should I say, presentation form than this. I have experimented with different ones. This is pretty close to what Greg proposed last year. But the solutions that I found to visualizing the relationships between the processes, the channels, and the contracts, it's not really that easy to visualize unless you go three-dimensional, but then it gets really complicated with doing this easily and quickly. I would like to wrap up to essentially which is already what I said. When you use a visualization like this, you can easily see what is concurrent, which process is concurrent to which process. You can also see which channel is visible, how deep, and how far its scope goes. And if you have a lot of inputs, you can also see how the information flows through the entirety of the contract. Further down the road, this is what I was hinting at, access relationships. So when you have a
Okay. And we have also like 15 more minutes until Greg dials in, so we can take our time.
Okay, two questions, or maybe the first one is more an observation. The gray rectangle, maybe we should just interpret it as boundary and not as process and something more. I think it is more appropriate to call it boundary. And the second thing is Hello World, my channel. Can you go back?
You mean this?
Yeah. Why is it necessary to send to my channel?
It's not strict. It's in this case, you know, if you exclude this pipe and this entire part here, all you would have is just this small smart contract. But then again, what would be invoking the smart contract? You need something to actually trigger the execution of this. And this happens by sending the process with the asterisk my channel to the hello world channel, which then executes.
You could also send Neil, right?
You could.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to.
So this is example, as hello world always is an example of something bigger. So here, for example, you're sending my channel on hello world, and you can actually see that contract hello world and then return. It means that my channel, which you're passing in there as some new channel, will turn into results. So actually there return dash hello world, it means we're sending not on return, because return doesn't mean anything, but return gets replaced by my channel, which you generated as a private channel in line 5. Do you still follow me? Yeah? And here you're doing nothing else than just printing or sending hello worlds to this channel, and that's it. But what you can also do, you can, after you print it, or after you send something in hello world, no, not on hello world, on my channel, you can also have another process, which is afterwards listening on something getting on my channel, or you can trigger a continuation, which happens after I get something on hello world, then send something to, I don't know, hello Donald Trump or whatever, or I mean, that's the principle in Archchain. You can send and receive, but the send and receive is not just sending and receiving, but once you receive something, you trigger a continuation. And in this continuation, whatever was returned gets replaced by my channel, and that's where the computation happens. So, I mean, this is really complex. I understand that, and but you have to wrap your mind around it. Yeah. So, sorry if it took too long.
No worries. Thanks for the comment. David, I have two questions for you. The first one is, while you were starting with wrapping your head around the visualization, do you think that it's applicable for the future that we will be able to write smart contracts just either via visual interface?
So there are several projects that are trying to achieve something similar, completely detached from blockchain. Just, you know, putting blocks together, compiling code out of that. Potentially we could. I mean, I'm not the expert on this. I mean, there are people who have been doing stuff like that, going from a visual representation to a structured representation to actual code. I'm sure this will be somewhere down there in 5 years, in 10 years. This is something that actually needs to happen for society as a whole to kind of approach technology in a more open way, not just always delegating to the nerds, the geeks, whatever. Actually, in the 70s and 80s, when it was kind of the first wave of, whoa, programming can make stuff happen, there was this kind of meme spread around that people who were in a position that would decide or influence things in an enterprise that would depend, let's say IBM, that would depend on code, they would think that any human can be taught to code. This has been kind of debunked by experience over the next 2-3 decades. But I think if we find the right way of communicating code, we can definitely expand the base of people who are able to program something, and even redefine what programming means, because programming to me means you want to make something happen, you think about it, and you just make it happen in a structured way. And the tools we have today just make it kind of hard to think in a structured way. And when you look at Rolang, it makes it one order of magnitude harder. Let's put it that way. And yes, I would definitely be very happy to see a visual code composition tool happen for Rolang. That would be great.
I mean, we see developments in augmented reality and virtual reality. So, I mean, we will see definitely the way that we can have 3D visualization of whatever, right? We already see that in the construction space. Mm-hmm. When you were thinking about having the third dimension on the visualization side, would you think that this is helpful for getting that complexity visualized?
I think yes, but not using this kind of visualization. I mean, if you imagine this in 3 dimensions, it becomes a maze that you have to walk through. So I'm leaning towards finding a new representation for that. I don't know what it might be. I'm not into VR, AR at all. I don't have time for that, which I would love to, but I don't. But this could be an incredible tool for education, really. I mean, if this becomes a standard of computation in the future, which I think is quite likely, because right now we don't have anything like this that is kind of pursued with this tenacity as we do. Yeah, visualizing it in 3 dimensions would work.
Thanks. Are there more questions?
I wanted to actually get back to the question at the beginning, because you know what I tried to convey at the beginning, I guess I was too short on breath, was that a gray box is not always a process. It is indeed a boundary to just define the scope. So, I mean, of course, here we define the scope of the new in, here we define the scope of the contract, but essentially here we have a process. I mean, now it's the stop process, so it's kind of boring. But on the 3rd slide, we actually saw a process that would have taken inputs and arguments. Just saying.
Maybe you should have like a dotted rectangle or something sort of process so that most often if you're using it as a boundary, it can be just a gray line.
I actually tried that, but then again, when you have several boxes right next to one another, and I mean, this is 1, 2, 4, 5. So this is not very complex, but when you have imagine you have a huge contract, and in parallel, concurrently to that, you have another contract of the same complexity happening. You will get lost. I mean, you might say, okay, maybe that's when we switch to a 3-dimensional point of view, but, you know, maybe in a year, maybe for the next big meetup, wherever it's going to be, we might have something like that.
Just maybe a suggestion, or I was wondering, have you tried coloring for the visualization with semantics instead of the actual grammar? So you color each variable, each different variable a different color? Because the syntax is so lightweight, there's not that many different things. I think it's
I haven't tried it, but it's definitely something I might want to look into.
Variable.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the suggestion, actually.
Have you thought about maybe having a Prezi style representation of this thing? Because now you have the nil process, but what if you could zoom into that? Yeah, in that kind of, yeah.
I absolutely understand what you mean.
It would get difficult with the channels because they go upwards, but you could like hide them in a kind of way, so you don't mention them. But if you zoom in, you get to understand it. Like the whole
I see what you mean. I haven't used Prezi. I only was vaguely aware of the concept, but now that literally, I've never used it.
Well, I'm referring to the zooming in function only. So
okay, I'm not sure if Google Slides has this, but this is actually a very good suggestion.
Let's try it with Prezi. I love that idea. It's awesome.
And support a Hungarian startup at the same time. Okay. No, actually, that's a good suggestion. I wish I could write this down.
So just as a proposal, or my point of view on that is, rather than having a 3-dimensional visualization of that, I would rather see forcing the developer to use the compositionality and modularity and keep the program in itself on one page. And then have the option to click on, for example, a process, and then a new window opens that describes this process.
Oh, it would be great if we had the tools for that.
Thanks for the suggestion. So more questions, please raise your hand.
And there was a direct reply right next to you.
Maybe I suggest some more general questions. We
Okay.
might accept them.
So this was a reply, right? And I'm sorry.
What you were talking about in 3 dimensionals, visualizing in 3 dimensions. Essentially, this Prezi approach is doing the same thing, but in slices.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, if you want to call it 2.5-dimensional or just sliced, it is the same thing in the end. You're absolutely right.
And it's way easier than looking at a 3-dimensional picture.
Depends on your brain, right?
True.
Let me go to the questions. So you had a question, right?
About the Prezi ID. It kind of already exists with different frameworks. So you have TensorFlow, a machine learning framework, that has an extensive tensor board where you can zoom in on parts of the computation graph to view well, kind of like this, but then with expansions. So you can hide the unimportant.
Yeah, so
details.
essentially it's like exploring a
Right.
small graph that has content, and whenever you
Exactly.
just get deeper into the graph, you see more detail. That would be great. That would be great. I mean, if you're working in this, let's just meet every second weekend in the month, and we can actually make this happen, because I definitely,
Well,
I will run out of time if I stop
Yeah,
doing
sure.
this.
Next question, maybe.
So we have 5 more minutes. And just to let you know, as a reminder for everyone, these are all co-op members which just joined some weeks ago. So if you want to participate and contribute, please let us know. Any more questions from your side? And they can also be non-technical. We have
think there
5
is
minutes
one
more to
here.
go before we tune in with Craig.
So I have 2 questions, sort of. Like, do you know if there are like existing work made on like visualizing functional languages, because they have kind of the same basis into the mathematics and pi calculus, or yeah, like this kind of stuff?
It sounds like a reasonable expectation, but I actually don't know of anything. Do you maybe know if there are frameworks that help visualize functional languages? Have you heard of any? I'm not going. I love LaTeX, but I'm not going to comment.
One is with Statebox.
Well, Statebox, that's
That's a good
indeed.
one.
Yeah.
Is it Dutch?
It's a very pity that they are not here, by the way. Just for the record, Statebox guys.
Yeah, I think one of them is outside, but maybe I was seeing ghosts. Second question.
Second question is a tough one, because it's highly subjective.
I think one of them is maybe I was. Excellent. So, bring it.
What's your favorite color?
My favorite color. So, the chosen one, or the one that is actually my favorite color?
If you think about a blockchain or something.
When you think about blockchain. Oh, yeah.
What about our chain?
My favorite color. And this is a very tough question. It's at the same time subjective, but it's also like a trick question.
Well, so you started by criticizing the color, didn't you?
My favorite color is definitely black, because black isn't the color, and that way I'm kind of showing that I'm a deviant. There you go. No, honestly, my favorite color personally is blue, but I look good in green. I don't think the Archain current official logo color is ever going to be my favorite, but I used it because it kind of was it was like an interrobang in your face. That was the reason. Thank you. Guys, we still have a few minutes.
Yes. Yeah, just continue.
More questions.
Just a general Archain question. I've become member of the COOP. What can I do now?
Well, as a co-op member, you can let me. The one thing that I think is quite important, but not really well working, is participating in the bounty system, which means Archain has a lot of issues, like every other blockchain project, that are bountied, so you can get a bounty for solving them. And this is something that you can easily do when you're a co-op member. I will not explain the process because they're fixing it. They're fixing it. But essentially, you need approval from other co-op members for your contribution towards a bounty. This is kind of reviewed by others, and then the bounty will be released to you. That's one thing you can do. Another thing...
Bounties are non-technical then? You don't mean code
both
bounties?
technical, non-technical and technical. And you can also propose your own bounties. If they are approved, essentially you can kind of create tasks and solve those tasks, or have other people solve those tasks.
But why would there be a threshold for open source contributions? I
What do
mean,
you
why
mean?
do I need to, I mean, becoming COOP member is a threshold. I need, for example, I need to identify myself. I might not want to. And so if I just look at the open source code, I want to contribute, why do I need to be a COOP member or co-op member?
Actually, I haven't contributed code yet. Do you know, Philip, if it's necessary to be a co-op member to be able to have a pull request? No.
No, I don't think so. Actually, you can, without being a member, without becoming a member.
One second.
I think it's only for
You can contribute without becoming a member, but to participate in the bounty system, you need to be part of the co-op with the identity and all that, because for US taxation purposes and accounting reasons, they need to be able to have that ability to say, here is who we paid how much, especially because if you are paid beyond a certain amount, then it needs to be recorded and reported.
So bounty implies reward, that's why. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, I thought you knew that, sorry. I mean, in general about bounties.
I mean, I'm new here, so I'm asking that questions.
You can also join and contribute to the members Discord. So there's like a chat that you can only chat on if you're have your KYC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and also there's a possibility to engage within the R-Chain co-op, so a cooperative. Is the model of the organizational structure of R-Chain. And you as a member, you can participate in the governance process, which is ongoing. And there's still certain things that needs to be improved. And yeah, and a lot of tasks are given out on the bounty system.
And another thing that I'm not sure if it was mentioned, R-Chain is in the process of creating a European co-op, so not just the American one, but also a European one. And in the near future, this might also be another option for you. I'm not sure what kind of KYC or what other rules they will employ, but if you want to kind of know about that and maybe influence that, becoming a co-op member or being a co-op member now is also a possibility. You get inside, you can actually see what's going to happen.
Like it's defined. You can go to the website. Like a co-op member has certain rights. One of these rights is, I think, to call a general meeting of other co-op members. One of the rights is to hire or fire board members. It's not a company, but it's as a co-op member you have some rights, and you can only access these rights actually being a co-op member. So. But that's a very good question. I think Mike is here already. Greg might come.
Wait a minute.
So let's have some more questions
I was being watched.
for now. Yes.
Can you explain more this? As a co-op member, I have the right to make an assembly, as you said before. Can you explain this, how this works? So, because there are a lot of members.
So how it works in practice, I'm not completely sure. Oh, you do. Okay, good.
In order to request or to have a special membership meeting, you need the quorum of 10%. So you need 10% of the membership to agree that there should be a specific membership meeting on a certain topic, and then yeah, this is gonna take place.
Okay, so Greg, Mike, do you hear us?
Yes. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. But 1 second, we put up this. Okay, can you do this? Because otherwise, I'm afraid.
Please keep talking, Greg. I need to find the right channel. Okay.
Yeah.
You want to talk or just Greg? Talking now. How is that? Is that good? Okay. There you go. Okay. It's probably not going to work right now. Okay. Mike, after you.
I am the CTO of Pyrofex.
Hierophex was hired by Archain to build their cryptocurrency platform. Greg and I have been working together for about a decade on type theory. So it was fairly natural that we would work together on designing the platform and getting it built.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've really enjoyed working with Mike over the last decade or so. I'm Greg Meredith. Currently, I'm the president of Archain Cooperative. Archain is built using some mathematics that I discovered and invented. I don't know what you want to say. And it turns out that that just happened to, by accident or fortune, line up very, very well with the market requirements for the blockchain. Okay. Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. I was initially working on, well, it's a long story. I'm going to tell you just a tiny piece of it. I had been working on a platform for a decentralized social network, and that had come about because I had an entrepreneur approach me and say that he was very, very concerned about the sort of privacy imbalance coupled with the economic imbalance. And he felt that that providing some kind of decentralized solution for that would make sense. And at the time, I was building a platform that that was essentially a platform for doing biology, decentralized approach to large-scale biology. And we realized that it could be appropriated to solve this problem. So we began working on that. And then I said, so yeah, but how are we going to make this sustainable, right? What's the click to pay event, and how do we, because we can't use ads, that's not going to work. And how do we make that solution be decentralized? And at that point, I realized, well, we needed this decentralized micropayment solution, and I was hoping desperately not to have to build that too. And I ended up, doing a deep dive on the proof of work and the Bitcoin blockchain and Ethereum and their approach. And eventually I concluded that neither of those approaches were going to be scalable, and realized what were the pieces that needed to make it scalable. One was a revamping of the economically secure, decentralized, distributed, leaderless consensus algorithm. And the other was making sure that what one stored was a concurrent execution, a concurrent VM. And since we had all those pieces, either in flight or already in hand, it made sense to start just rebuilding that. And the truth is that the vast majority of the efforts in the space that have made progress have taken control of the blockchain technology. Waiting for someone else to come along with a good scalable blockchain technology has simply not been a viable approach in the market at this point. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm here in Iceland, and we're in the middle of a video shoot, so I'm kind of doing this multitasking here, but hopefully that made sense. Oh yeah, absolutely. We want. I mean, the situation is all hands on deck, right? I mean, the fact is we need a decentralized platform because we have so much to do. The coming changes with respect to the environment are going to be very big, and they're going to require coordination at a scope and scale that we've never experienced before. and so really it is all hands on deck. So we need as many people engaged and working on the platform as possible. So really I'm excited to see that there's so many people engaged. Sure. Actually, I would love to stick around and listen to the developer questions. Yeah.
Well, I am particularly excited by it. When I started working with Greg and learning about his Special K framework, which was some stuff that we were working on with that entrepreneur, we found that it could do all of the major publication subscription models. So you can do push, pull, messaging, broadcast, selection, pub/sub, all of those, NoSQL, all of those styles of communicating data to clients were possible in this framework. So that by itself was pretty cool. Then the type theory came in, and in Scala, we've got structural typing where you can say, I want something, an object that has a method with this signature on it. In Rolang, you can not only say things like that, you can say, I want a program with this structure. So you can characterize implementation details as well as mere data interfaces. As we get to behavioral types in Venus, we intend to be able to say, I need an algorithm that runs in n-log-n time for this, with this signature, and has these preconditions and postconditions. So whereas in Hugel, you can now search for functions that go from a list of integers to a list of integers, but you'll get the identity function as well as reverse, as well as sort, as well as scramble. All of those are potential solutions of that type-based query. But as we add the structural and behavioral types, we'll be able to make much finer grained queries that say a lot more about what we're looking for. And given a database of code, some kind of repository of code, that provides a new way to monetize open source, that code authors can provide their code and say, I'm willing to let this code be linked in for a fee. And then anyone who wants a particular behavior just has to code up the type, not the entire program, and it'll go find the program that'll solve that for them. Greg was talking about biological approaches. If you can characterize the behavior using a behavioral type of processes that are describing biological processes, that is computational processes that are representing biological ones, then you can issue queries for small molecules that have a particular effect in a biological regime, and so search for cures for diseases and so forth using this kind of language. Now, we're not claiming that the search algorithm is efficient or easy to implement or is going to be done in polynomial time or anything. It just is the fact that now this kind of query becomes possible to state, and then we can work on figuring out which queries are efficient and useful and so on. So all of this stuff taken together, combined with the fact that the derivatives market in the US is something like $250 billion, and smart contracts are either currencies or derivatives, means there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in this space. Yes, so since the last developer conference, we've made some more changes with respect to the way namespaces work and so on. The problem is that we found a trade-off between, let's see, assurance and distributed computation. So in Ethereum, every computer is a copy of the same state. You get no performance benefit by putting it on more computers, because every computer has to simulate the entire thing. If you split up the work so that different computers are working on different things, then they are no longer validating each other's work because they don't have the right inputs. So there's this trade-off between how much am I checking the other guy's work to make sure that it all went well, and how much can we split up the problem among lots of different computers. So at the moment we have a sort of two-level plan where essentially you have lots of different copies of Archain blockchains that are all being clients of each other. And you have to trust these other blockchains to some extent, because they are doing work that you are not. And so if you want information from them, you just trust that they are giving it to you. Now you can query lots of parts of that network and get many different computers to tell you the same thing, but you're not validating that they have come to the answer correctly. So that's the fundamental trade-off that we're trying to work with in our scaling approach. I can speak to a little of that. Right now, Ethereum is getting approximately 10 transactions a second, and for that is paying the energy cost of the entire nation of Ireland. Because we have no hard problems to solve, it will be enormously faster and enormously cheaper energy-wise. Essentially, the proof of work algorithm prevents you from double spending, whereas proof of stake algorithm merely punishes you for double spending. So it's an after the fact rather than before the fact thing. And so if it's detected that there's an equivocation, you simply lose your bond, as opposed to staking the hardware up front. You stake money that can then be revoked. Not at all. The tuple space itself is language agnostic. Today I was actually looking at the potential of putting JavaScript on the Archain tuple space. The language Rolang is going to change fairly significantly towards Venus. We intend to add a purely functional sublanguage. We intend to have synchronous continuation. So at the moment, the only continuation of a send is nil. Whereas the fact that we can detect that a message has been received in the tuple space means that we can have a continuation after send is acknowledged there, that the block has finalized. So now when we're communicating between blockchains, there's the opportunity for purely asynchronous communication. But within a single one of these blockchains, a single namespace, the communication can be synchronous. Our intent for Mercury is that it be a proof of concept, that we learn from it, and then that it would continue to run as a small part of the Venus network. And we would encourage people to transition away from it. We'll be adding behavioral types, as I mentioned before, to the Venus language. It will grant much more security to the contracts by using behavioral types when you're writing. So yeah, we expect the language to continue to develop and grow, but that won't cause a problem because the tuple space is language agnostic. So I heard two different questions there. One was about whether we could do a Facebook style thing, and one was whether we would implement an Ethereum node in Rolang. We intend to have a notion of an oracle, which allows you to do HTTP fetching. Now, of course, there are lots of different approaches to that. Perhaps if this HTTP fetch is side effecting, you only want it to happen once. And so then you would elect a particular node to do the fetch on your behalf. There would be no way to verify that it returned the right thing. If it's not side effecting, then perhaps you elect a subset of validators to all make the same request and verify that the result is the same before continuing. But there is, we do intend to provide that ability. And of course, intend to expose the state of the blockchain in a web-friendly way so that people can write dApps that have a web component. So the Facebook style thing seems eminently doable. I don't know that you would want to write an Ethereum node in Rolang. That seems like you're layering one blockchain on top of another one, causing these you would be paying out the nose for the computation that the Ethereum program, because it's proof of work, you would be paying for doing cryptography over and over and over and over again on 1,000 computers all computing the same thing. So it really doesn't make sense to do Ethereum on top of Rolang. That said, because our current plan involves independent blockchains being clients of each other, you can maintain state about contracts running in an Ethereum blockchain and interact with that as a client, just like you would interact with a different Archain blockchain as a client. So it's conceivable that you could use Ethereum as a node in the Archain network. But we haven't worked out the details of that yet. Well, identity itself, the question was, what do I think about identity on Archain, given that you can create as many as you need? The object capabilities community has, for decades, been pushing the view that identity is rarely, if ever, necessary for doing what you usually want to do. I would highly recommend going and reading the object capabilities literature to get a flavor of that. But just for instance, when you go to the store and pay in cash, nobody cares what your identity is. All they care is that the money you are handing over is legal tender. If you go to the grocery store and sign up for a loyalty card, they don't care about your name per se, just that you present that same card when you go back, right? If it's, say, a coffee shop, they just give you 10 punches and then reward you. They just care about whether you've presented the card or not. With the grocery store, they track your purchases and do correlations on things that you're trying to buy so they can offer you deals and get you to buy more, but they don't particularly care what your name is or so on. I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? So for self-sovereign identities, that is really managing how much information is shared between different clients of your identity, right? But again, each different view of identity, whether it's, I received this message along this channel and all I know is that it came over that channel, versus here is an attestation from some party that I am relying on to verify certain properties, right? Like in the United States, you have to present your identification in order to go into a bar. The bar relies on the driver's license bureau to check the birth date of the the holder of the card. So then all they have to do is make sure that the face matches the thing on the card, and they check the age. Anytime that you're relying on somebody else to validate something, that's a different notion of identity. The banks, when they issue credit, only care about your transaction history. They don't so much care about other properties of your identity, who your friends are, and so on. They just want to see a bunch of transactions, and they don't even care really about the details of the transactions. They just have some set of rules, and if your set of transactions meets their rule, then you pass and you get approved for credit. So in each of these situations, there are different notions of identity, but I think all of them, insofar as you can code up what you mean, are supportable on RChain. And so we'll be able to support a vast ecosystem of different notions of identity, and it'll be really fun to see how they work with each other. Well, it's really gratifying to see so much interest in this project, to see the growth of the project. We're very grateful for all of you and your time and your loss of sleep coming to spend it here with us. I look forward to future collaboration, and excited to see what you guys build on top of RChain. Thank you. Thanks for having me. See you later.
No problem. So with that, we end the evening. Thank you so much for coming here and spending the time with us. For us, the main motivation to organizing these events was to give you something of our knowledge, which we gathered for the last couple of times. But this is really a nascent technology. It's new, it's exciting. I hope you see that it has a lot of possibilities. Please contact us. We are a group, and the community is just getting started, which means that we are really open to collaborate with all of you. Just the fact that you are here this evening means that you are actually capable of collaborating with you, that you're interested in it, and that's really everything which is needed at the moment. So we have to drink in Brewery De Praal. Big part of our group will be there, and I hope we'll enjoy some more beers with everybody. If not, I completely understand it. It's a lot. So please be in touch. Come to Berlin on 3 to 6 December. There will be more meetups from RChain Europe, perhaps here. But most of all, we need you. So thank you, and enjoy the night.